Hey guys, today we're going to talk about APIs and webhooks and how does that apply in n8n. So really cool course or mini course for beginners out there who are just starting off with n8n. So this is really one of the core concepts and backbones really if you want to do n8n and automations. It's really important that you do understand how APIs and webhooks work in the background, guys. Okay, so we're going to cover what are APIs, how requests and responses work and how they are made within each other, right? What are webhooks and why are they sometimes called APIs or reverse APIs in a sense, right? And how to use both in n8n, guys. Okay, so again, it's going to be sort of like interactive video course, I would say. We're going to talk about what it is in terms of terms. And then we're going to go through a couple of n8n workflows. So where I'm going to visually show you, APIs and webhooks and how does that connect between applications and n8n workflows, guys. So yeah, it's going to be hands-on and also a bit of theory, guys. So let's go ahead and dive into it right away. All right, so what is a API? I'm going to give you a sort of easy example. So imagine you are at a restaurant, okay, and you are a customer or a client, okay, and the waiter at the restaurant is a API or the AKA, the interface, okay, and kitchen is a application or a server, okay. So I have three key components here: you, the waiter, and kitchen, and that basically is our API, okay. So you order the food, waiter delivers your request or your order, okay. Then kitchen prepares it, and then waiter brings it back to you, okay. So you order. The waiter delivers the order request to the kitchen, okay, and kitchen makes the request, and then waiter brings back you the prepared and ready to go dinner for you, okay, or order, right? So, and same cycle essentially happens with the API. It's like super similar, okay? So you order something through the API, request goes to the source or to the application, then your request gets prepared. For example, we can take an example, something like VO3 for generating an image. So if you want to generate an image with VO3, we're going to send the request from n8n to a VO3 server or to Google. Google's servers, they're going to prepare the video and the final result for you. And then they're going to send back the final video output or result back to you to n8n. And then you can basically preview, download, or whatever you want to do with that file down the road, okay? So that's essentially what it is. Sounds complicated, but actually it's pretty easy if you kind of break it down into these parts. And if we talk about technicalities, so what is API by definition? It's an application programming interface, okay? Or basically in beginner terms, let's say it's a contract of services that an app exposes, right? So essentially think of it as the app that you are communicating to, for example, Google VO3, okay? It's gonna expose certain services, okay? For example, it can be it can be a audio, it can be a video, maybe it can be some other binary files, binary data, or any kind of data. So it's exposing that data as a contract of service that you can pull from n8n, right? So that's essentially what it is in beginner terms, so you guys can kind of understand it because application program interface sounds kind of weird. But if we talk about, it's a basic contract of services between applications, that kind of what makes more sense for you as a beginner, for example. And how it works, developers or n8n consume these services, okay? So Google VO3 exposes whatever they want to expose, okay? And n8n will consume that, okay? So VO3 offers, for example, video and audio that you can pull from their API, and n8n will consume that through the workflow, right? And then you do whatever you want to do with the VO3 API output from the Google's service, for example. And what can we get as a service or as a contract service from these APIs? For example, get user profile. Again, this is really generic. Get user profile, update calendar event, or send a message. Okay, so these are really good examples if we are working with Google Notes, right? So for example, if I go here and if I have the spreadsheet right here, right? So essentially everything here is happening through an API, right? So we're getting something from the spreadsheet, right? So this node right here is getting data from a Google spreadsheet, right? So we are basically, in this operation, we're actually creating a row. So we are actually sending the data to the spreadsheet to append the row in the spreadsheet, okay? So we're sending data through API to the Google, right? But if we want to get something from the API from Google spreadsheet, right? we're going to be using a get row. So this way we are requesting, hey, can you send me all the rows that you have in the spreadsheet? So that's a API operation. And at its core, why do we have APIs and why do they even exist, right? So if we wouldn't have APIs, we would basically have to call databases or code or servers directly, okay? And that would be quite messy, right? That would be much more complex and it wouldn't be beginner friendly at all. You would need to actually understand how to query databases or how to work with backend servers, right? Where with API, it's kind of always the same thing, right? APIs always have the same structure, regardless of is it VO or is it Cling or, like any application that offers some kind of a service, right? They all have APIs and APIs usually follow the same structure. So once you learn the API, it's going to be always the same thing, right? So let me just give you a couple examples here. So if I go to OpenAI API reference, for example, okay, well, let's open up their documentation. And basically we have a couple options here, okay? Again, we'll talk about authorization and all these things right here, but it's always kind of the same thing, right? So we are calling the API with authorization, and then we're sending something through a body, okay? Let me show you guys if I can find a better example here. So this would be a good example. So this is coming basically from API as a response, okay? And any API that you're going to be working with, it's usually going to give you some sort of response based on whatever you are requesting from that API as a service or as a contract, but it's always going to be following the same pattern, which is basically a JSON, right? So APIs are basically returning a JSON object, and in there you're going to have like objects, status, and a bunch of other stuff, like really depending on API and what are you trying to achieve or what kind of a contract you want to request from the API, but it's always going to be a sort of JSON object in this format. And again, we'll talk about it also just in a second. And if I open the Gemini API documentation, you guys can see it's essentially very similar to OpenAI because it's always the same structure for any API you guys are going to use, right? So we have the authentication, X Google API key, right? So this is the authorization. Then we have the body, basically content type, okay, which is JSON. And then here's the content and whatever we're trying to pull from that API, guys. If I go back to OpenAI, you guys can see there's a bit more here. But again, this is a really bare bone example, but it's always kind of the same structure, guys. So that's what I'm saying. Once you learn APIs as a whole thing, it's going to be really, really easy to work with them because it's essentially always the same with whichever service provider you're going to be working. Okay, guys, so that brings us to our next key factor. Okay, so documentation is the menu, guys. Okay, documentation is like, I can't stress enough how important documentations are. I know it kind of sounds weird for me to tell you, hey, go read something on a web page, but that is really the best way when you are working with APIs. Okay, because that's the menu, that's reference. Okay, because if you don't look at the documentation, you won't know exactly what are the options for that API. Okay, so another example here, if I want to do web scraping, okay, we would be usually working with something like Apify, which is basically a marketplace for web scrapers, right? So the way it works, you have web scraper for anything really through Apify. Check them out, guys. Really, really cool platform. And if we look at the HTTP, which is essentially how we are calling the API through a HTTP method, we'll talk about it also in a second. You guys can see, again, we have a JSON and some arrays, right? And we'll talk about that also just in a second, guys. But again, the same thing. We have the authorization. You guys can see API token, and then we are basically sending application JSON or the body request, okay? And always the same thing. JSON, you have the company name, Google, Microsoft, right? Because here we are scraping LinkedIn jobs. So this API offers basically to scrape job postings on LinkedIn. And for example, if you want to create a n8n workflow to scrape jobs, for example, from Microsoft or from Google or from any other company, maybe job in IT or marketing, right? This is how you're gonna basically request that, okay? You're gonna say, hey, I wanna scrape jobs from Google and Microsoft, and maybe if you wanna add company ID, that works too. And then I believe they should have more options, what kind of job, is it marketing, is it IT, right? So all of that is done through API, right? So if you don't look at this, you just essentially don't know what can you request from API. And if you request something that's not there, you're gonna have a server or API error. It's gonna say, hey, this request doesn't exist because it just simply isn't there, guys, okay? So that's why it's really important to always look back to documentation. You can use AIs, ChatGPT, or Perplexity better for documentations, right? If you need to ask something specific, it's going to give you links and it's going to give you also the references. And what it does really, you're going to learn about the endpoints, okay, what's available or what kind of dish is available, parameters, ingredients that you can customize if you want to for your request. What kind of methods, again, we'll talk about it in a second. So we have get and post, right? When we're getting something for API, we're going to use get. When we're sending something to API, we're going to be using a post, but we'll touch on those just in a second. And authentication, really important, guys, because if you don't have authentication or the key to the API, it's just going to give you a server error and it's going to say you're not authorized to get this order. Okay, really simple. So now let's talk about requests and responses. Okay, so request is basically the action you send to the API, and response is the data that you get back from the API, right? So client is the AKAU or the n8n workflow from where you are requesting that, and server is the app providing the data. Okay, so it's Google Gemini, is it OpenAI, is it Kling or whatever, any other API platform out there for any type of service. So that's going to be the server or the app providing the data to you. Okay, so let's look at the anatomy of requests. So the way it works, this is, for example, a example API. We have api.weather.com, and then we have basically the city, which is Toronto, right? So this means that through this API right here, we want to consume the weather data for Toronto, right? So this is basically the, this is the address. Let's think of it this way. This is the address. This is the main address. And now we're going to be pulling the data from this address. So what do I want to do with this address, or what do I want to do with this API? Do I want to get something from it? Do I want to send data to it, right? So, and etc. Then for headers, again, headers are essentially authentication or what kind of format you're sending. And then body is basically what you are, what do you want to get from that API as a body content, okay? So again, let me show you visually. It's going to be a bit easier for you to understand. So let me just go to executions here so we can actually preview a previous execution. So here, if I go to my HTTP node, if I open it up, you guys are going to see that we are asking basically a couple of things from this API through Apify. And just a bit of summary, this workflow right here, what it does, it scrapes certain Instagram profiles for certain creators. In my case, creators that are in n8n or AI automation, right? I'm scraping their top performing reels, and then I'm basically analyzing it by logging all the data on spreadsheet, so I can create maybe inspired reels myself, okay? Just to really keep up with the trends and stuff like that. So what I'm asking from this API, first of all, the main address is Instagram. And then we're using expression, or basically we are feeding to this API the Instagram handles of those creators, okay? And this is coming from the spreadsheet. And this is really the important part, okay? So this is what we are sending to API. So we want to make sure that the user is user real feed URL. That is true. It's one of the API options for this API, okay? Then we're saying is user tagged on the feed, which is false. And we'll also talk about the true and false Boolean values here. Then we're limiting results to 30 max, okay? Then we want results, result type to be posts, okay? And this is a string. And search limit is 1. We only want to do search once, not twice, not 3 times. And essentially it's a number, okay? And the search type is based on a user. You can also have this based on a hashtag, I believe. But again, for me to figure out how this works, I would need to use their API. Okay, so if I go to, for example, Apify Instagram scraper, okay? So if I scroll down to the options we have here, you guys can see it's the same thing, search. Let me just go here, whoops. Let me just drag it here. So results limit 100, same thing, results limit is 30 here. So this data that I have here, I didn't come up with it out of thin air. All of this was basically taken from the API documentation here. Okay, so this is how I know what to ask from API. Okay, so I looked at this at the options here, and then I only added the ones that were relevant for my workflow, guys. Okay, that's essentially how it works for the request, okay? And for example, here, if I go to the HTTP node itself, you guys can see I'm using a post method because I'm sending something to API. I'm sending my request with this data right here. For authentication, I'm using a header. So the authentication or authorization, or basically the login information, let's say it in this way. So login information is sent through the header. And for a header, we are using a credentials to a API key. Okay, and I'm gonna show you also just in a second how that works, guys. Okay, so let's go back to our PDF here. So that's essentially is covering this part right here. So let's talk about the different types of requests that you can do with API. Okay, so we have get, post, put patch, and delete. Okay, so just a couple of edge cases here. When you work with n8n, you won't be working really with delete, put patch, or just these ones to put patch and delete. These are really rare edge cases. This is really most of the time used when you are working with databases directly, when you are trying to make changes in a database, right? Or do something, for example, if you want to delete something in database, or when you want to update something in database, you're going to be using these three right here. But n8n, in most of the cases, you're going to be working with get because you want to get something from API, and post because you want to send something to API so you can get it back after, okay? So yeah, we're not going to be talking about this too much because this is really more if you are into building databases and a bit of a backend development. So yeah, for n8n, we're really focusing on get and post in 99% of the cases. Okay, guys, authentication. So that's the big one. So authentication is basically a think of it as in a way that APIs usually prove that you are allowed to make this request. Otherwise, anybody could have a API and call to Google VO3 and get their video content generation models for free. Okay, so this way, that's how it works. You create an account, you pay for you pay for the account, you put some money on API on tokens. You pay, for example, $22, and in return, Google gives you this secret API key that is essentially your key to use this to use their API. Okay, so that's essentially how it works. It's basically your key to use the service provider's APIs. Okay, and either it's API key, okay, usually through header or query string. So that's kind of one of the common ones. So in this example right here, let me just go back to the editor. So if I go to my HTTP request, and if I go to my header F, I'm gonna go click here, create a credential, and here it's gonna ask me for name and value, okay? So name is usually something called authorization, and then value, you're gonna have something called barrier, and then the API key. And then again, how do I know exactly what goes here? Besides the API key, right? So API key, obviously, right? So you can go to let's go to console here. So, okay, let's go back to their documentation, okay? So for the way we decide what goes, for example, in here, name and value, okay? So in name, what we usually put is gonna be a name of the authorization, okay? So the name of the, so the name is the actual name of the authorization, okay? So in most cases, it's gonna be actually authorization, okay? So we're just gonna bring it here and in here. And in the value, what's gonna happen here, it's a bit different here. So basically, for your API key, when you generate your API token through Apify, for example, okay, you need to add a word called barrier, okay, and then press space and copy paste your API key, right? So how would that look like? So let me just open up my little notepad right here, guys. Okay, so here I already have an example. So basically barrier, and then you're gonna have your Apify, whatever the API key that's gonna generate for you through their console. And you're gonna essentially copy this entire thing here, and you're gonna bring it to your n8n, and here you're gonna copy paste that in the value, okay? So when you're working with header authentications in n8n, so in the name, it's gonna be the name or the type of the authorization, okay? This is the authorization, one of the most generic one, and the value is gonna be your API key, okay? So in a lot of cases, it's gonna come with this word barrier, okay? So how do you know how to do that? You always need to check with the API reference, okay? Because it's different for each of them. For example, if I do something like OpenAI, so if I, for example, add OpenAI node, okay, here it's a bit different. If I click on creating credential, okay, The only thing they're asking is API key, okay? And the reason for that is because this is a official OpenAI node in n8n. So they made it more simple. All you need to do is just go to their API platform, generate the API key, put some money on it, and copy paste that in here, and you are good to go. But when you're working with smaller, third party, I would say API providers like Apify, for example, you will be doing authentication usually using the HTTP node. Okay, so in a lot of cases, you're going to see that a lot of n8n creators are sending the authorization and authorization through here, which is not really secure, because what's going to happen, you will again need to add your authorization here, for example, authorization, and then value barrier. So essentially kind of the same thing like I showed you guys before, but the risk with this is that if you export this workflow and if you share it on internet or YouTube with somebody, they will have your API key. So I've seen it so many times when I work with different templates. I've seen that a lot of people put their API key in here and they forget about it, which is totally normal. So that's why my suggestion is to just go the safe route and just create it through a header off option here. Basically create your credential, enter authorization, your barrier API key, and then save it. And this way you can always reuse it in all of your n8n workflows without exposing it to public and accidentally leaking your API key. Okay, guys? So just really a side note. Okay, so let's talk about responses. So when you send a API, there's usually a response. Basically, API responds to you if this is good or this is not good, or basically there's something wrong with it, okay, in simple terms, okay? So the couple of numbers you need to remember. So 200 is always success, it's green, okay? We will always like to see 200 because it means everything went smoothly. 401, this usually happens when your API key is wrong or your authorization is wrong or credentials are wrong. You're gonna see 401, okay? 404 is basically classic, it's whatever you are asking for, it's not found, doesn't exist, or it's not there anymore. And 500 is when there's a problem with the server, okay? So when the issue is not really on your side, but the issue is on the provider side, okay? So these are really the key numbers you should remember, because when you work with n8n, if there's any problem with the server, you're gonna have a pop-up in n8n, and it's gonna give you a server code, and this way you will know exactly what's the problem with your API, if there's any, okay? So usually if it's 200, it's not gonna give you anything. You can see the 200 if you go into executions, for example. I'm not sure if you can see it here. Let me see if we can get it quickly here. If I open it from here, let's see video URL. Can we see the success code? We could. Okay, guys, it's probably somewhere in here. So usually they say something like response or status, and then it says success and 200. But I just can't go through it because it's just too many things in there, guys, okay? Okay, let me just try it again. Let me just scroll through it. Maybe it's gonna be all the way on the bottom. Let me see. So no, that's really just the data from the API, username, text. Okay, these are really just like user-based data, okay? So yeah, but it's somewhere buried in there. It's gonna say something like success, and it's gonna say 200, okay, guys? Cool, so, but if there's an error, you're gonna see a error in the actual n8n as a toast messaging saying, hey, there's like 400 or 401 error, okay? Cool, guys. So that's basically for APIs, okay? So before I move on to webhooks, let me show you it in real action. So if I go here to editor, let me launch this n8n workflow. So what's gonna happen, it's taking content creators IDs from here, or basically the handles. Let me just re-verify this quickly. Okay, so here I have two content creators that do content on n8n and automations. So basically we're pulling this data from here, from the spreadsheet. Okay, so we want to get these two content creators, and then we're going to basically send them to the API right here, because we want to now scrape their Instagram profile for the most or top performing content on their feed. Okay, so we are looking for basically top performing content, and what we're going to do, we're going to limit it to 30 results. Then basically we're going to sort it based on the most views, and then we're going to filter out and choose only the top 5, the ones that have the most views, and we're going to log all of that into a spreadsheet, okay? But really the focus of this video, let's take a look at the actual execution here, guys. for the API, guys. All right. So here you can see workflow executed successfully. So essentially this is our status to 100. Okay, so it was success. Here we can see the data that we received from the API. Okay, so we have the caption, we have the hashtags. Okay, and we have images and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, so if I, for example, I don't think I can just copy paste this entire thing, but let me see if it works. Yeah, guys, it works. So you guys can see it's actually pulling the images from the Instagram profile, which is pretty awesome, guys. So a lot of cool stuff you can do with that. So we can essentially analyze somebody's or content creators' Instagram reels and images and do something similar as an inspiration, okay? So we have a bunch of data coming from the API. So then we're gonna log this data into a spreadsheet right here. So what we wanna get, the creator, who are we getting this data from? We're getting the video for the URL, caption, likes, and stuff like that. So all of this is coming from the API, okay? So now when you are building workflows, you can essentially choose any of these ones here and you can log it to your spreadsheet. You can log it to Airtable. You can do a lot of cool things with that. But again, my point is, guys, that's essentially how APIs work. And I hope you wrapped your head around it. If not, leave a comment below. Let me know what you didn't understand about APIs, and I'm gonna help you out to understand that. If not, let's move on to a webhook and let's talk about a little bit about what that is. So webhook is basically imagine you're waiting for a delivery, you're waiting for your Amazon package, okay? And you keep refreshing that tracking page and like, where's my order? I've been waiting for 4 hours. Like, and you keep refreshing, like, where's my order? Okay, so that's option number one. Okay, and option B would be you get notification when your order gets delivered. Okay, so two different ways we can use a webhook. Okay, so either we keep refreshing, waiting for that order to come in, or we can just have an option to get notification when the order gets delivered. Okay, so the webhook equals it's a instant notification in a sense. Okay, so option one is polling, meaning that we are waiting for something to complete and then we send you the notification. But option B is essentially how webhook works. Okay, so the minute something happens on the webhook, you get notified instantly. Okay, so for example, if the app is saying, hey, something just happened, here is the data. Okay, so the action happens on the spot. Okay, so this is really cool because you can trigger actions from different apps through n8n and from different forms, right? For example, if you ever use Typeform, right? So you can have a lead that goes on a Typeform, fills in information, and once the information is filled, you connect it to your webhook in n8n, and the minute the lead is submitted, the n8n workflow gets triggered instantly, and then you can process data, analyze data with the agent, stuff like that, and do whatever you want to do with that lead down the road. Okay, so let's talk about the basics of the webhooks. Okay, so you provide a webhook URL from n8n. Okay, the app sends HTTP post to that URL with an event. Okay, so you have URL, and then then the app sends a post, or it sends some sort of data to that URL of this webhook. Okay, and the data is delivered instantly to your workflow. Okay, so that's how it is. And then there's no need for constant check-in. Let me show actually a really visual example here. So I have this app that I've built in Replit, and here I'm actually using a webhook from n8n. So this is the actual webhook little mini workflow. So you guys can see here's webhook, and here is the URL. Okay, I'm using public URL because the application is online public. So this is the URL for the webhook. Okay, that's connected to n8n. If I go to my Replit, and if I open my my server, okay, guys, let me just open up here, and you guys can see here I have a constant, and constant basically is n8n webhook URL, and this is the exact same URL that I'm using here. So the way this application works, basically, once I drop an image here. Let me actually pull an image so I can show you live. So let me just literally pull in any image. Let me just pull these picture of these Nikes here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take an image like this. All right, so we're just gonna save, we're gonna save this to my downloads. Okay, so cool. Now let's go back to my application here. I'm gonna drop this image here and I'm gonna send that. So what's gonna happen here, guys, it's gonna be sent instantly to this webhook, guys. You guys can see it's starting to run. Okay, so the webhook is going to analyze the image because that's what it does. It's going to analyze the image, and then it's going to give me the prompt for that image. Okay, here it essentially describes the image that I provided, okay? Individual jumping wearing casual attire that includes light blue jeans and white high-top sneakers, okay? So basically, it's an application that gives you a prompt to generate an image like this, okay? And the way it works, if I go back to n8n, let's just give it a second because there's a delay between the servers. You guys can see here was the webhook. What I received was image, and image is basically a binary, okay, guys? So APIs don't send an actual image file like we see it. It's going to be basically a binary. Okay, so then we're going to be converting that to a file. We're converting this image binary to a image like this, and then it's going to be processed by the AI agent here, and then it's going to give us a prompt to describe that image. Okay, guys. But again, that's essentially how webhooks work in simple terms. And a couple of more use cases above and beyond n8n. So payment processor. Okay, so when you are buying something online, we use Stripe. And the minute your payment is processed, okay, we are sending a webhook that transaction is cleared, okay? E-commerce, same thing, guys. When, for example, you have Shopify and somebody places an order on your Shopify, it's going to send a webhook that there's a new order, and you're going to get a notification right away on your phone or on your application, okay? Form tools like Timeform, chat, application pings, you know, the minute, for example, once you receive a message on your WhatsApp or Telegram, it's going to be a webhook. It's going to say, hey, you just got a message, and that's essentially in the background a webhook. And what's the difference between the two, guys? So APIs versus webhooks. Basically, API is pulling something because you need to request and pull that from the API. And webhook is a push model, okay? So the minute the data is there, or the minute the data touches the webhook, the notification is instant, okay? You don't need to send anything to webhook. You know, well, you could, but my point is, so the webhook reacts instantly, where API, you need to send something to the API, and then you need to wait for it, and then you need to receive from the API, okay? And in n8n, we are using that to talk to APIs through the HTTP request node. And for webhooks, we are basically catching events. Like for this application here, guys, we are catching that there is an image incoming from this application to our n8n, and then we analyze and create a prompt for it using our AI agent, for example. Okay, guys, and the best practices for APIs and webhooks in general. So always check API docs. I can't stress enough, guys. Like really important. Store API keys securely. Okay, don't paste in public spaces or nodes, like I mentioned, guys, because if you do, literally anybody can use that, and then you will see your API usage skyrocketing and your credits will be done. Okay, it's a really major security risk unless you're working in a big company. That is because you can have like company API keys that can be an issue. But again, the worst that thing can happen, somebody will use all of your credits unless your API key is, you know, compromised and it's transmitting sensitive consumer data. That's a different story. So the best practice is really always keep your API keys secure. Always. Don't share it with family, don't share it with your friends. API key is yours, and make sure it stays that way. You can also use something like Postman. So Postman is basically a platform where you can post APIs, where you can basically test APIs. Again, I'm not going to cover that today. It's more a bit of an advanced topic, but if you guys want to, leave a comment below. And I can make a separate video on Postman and how to test APIs and how to work with APIs a bit more in detail. Always add error handlings, for n8ns. You can basically use, let me go back to editor. So you can use like error nodes, right? So if there's like an error, this is an error trigger. So if there's some kind of error that happens, you can get notified through a email or Telegram, whatever you choose to connect it with, right? So this way you know if there's a problem with API, okay? And always label your nodes clearly, okay? So for example here, let me just go back to my, right here. So you guys can see, so by default, this is gonna be called HTTP node or HTTP request node. So always make sure to label what it is, okay? So in my case, it's Instagram Reel Scraper. So you can do something like Instagram Reel Scraper API GET request. If you're a complete beginner, it's going to be easier for you to understand and kind of see how the entire thing flows, guys, okay? So that's about it, guys. And yeah, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be dropping this PDF as a free, freebie, guys, as a free guide, guys, for you to help you out with your API and webhook learning journey. If you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'm gonna help you out. And make sure to like and subscribe to my channel because I'll be dropping a lot of these videos for all my beginners out here. So making sure that you'll learn n8n in a proper way and you are confident enough to start building your own workflows and maybe work with the clients, guys. Okay. And besides that, as always, I'm going to see you next time and I'm going to wish you happy building.